creatine. But let's say that you want to improve your performance in a given type of exercise. Let's talk about some of the things that seem to work across the board to improve strength, improve hypertrophy, and improve nerve to muscle communication and performance. The first thing that's absolutely key for nerve to muscle communication and physical performance of any kind, very exciting, and that's in order to change the nerve to muscle connectivity in ways that will better serve you, you need a stressor during the actual training. Which particular stressor depends on your training goals. But that stressor is almost always going to be associated with inflammation. And then after the training, you want to try and get into a state of reduced inflammation. And these are tools that I've talked about many times before, but I'll just restate them again. The kind of golden three, according to Andy Galpin, and the ones that he recommends are sufficient omega-3s. Again, that can be accomplished through diet, through whole food intake, or through supplementation, or both. So in general, getting above 1,000 milligrams of EPA per day to keep inflammation low or relatively low. Vitamin D, and in some cases, magnesium malate. Magnesium malate seems to be particularly effective in offsetting delayed onset muscle soreness. Soreness itself is not required for improvements in strength, improvements in explosiveness, improvements in hypertrophy. That's a myth. Now, if you do experience delayed onset muscle soreness, chances are you stressed that particular muscle pretty well, or even maybe too well. Maybe you stressed it too much and you need longer recovery. In general, the omega-3, vitamin D, and magnesium malate trio seem to be an effective way to reduce inflammation at kind of a systemic level. But remember, you want inflammation provided you're not damaging the muscle so much that you're injured during the training session, because that's the stimulus for change in those muscles. I want to talk about a few other things that support the process of nerve to muscle communication and touch on some of the things that a lot of people are doing to try and quote unquote enhance their workouts, and evaluate whether or not those are in fact enhancing workouts or not. Because weight training, unlike a lot of other forms of exercise, has a unique aspect to it, which is this feature that I guess some people call it the pump, which is the fact that blood goes into the muscle when you train. It's the only kind of training where you actually get a window into what the result might actually look like before you actually accomplish that result. So if you think about when you go out for a hard run, and let's say you go out for a 2-mile run, let's say your goal is to break, you want to do a sub-10 2-mile, but let's say that you want to improve your performance in a given type of exercise. Let's talk about some of the things that seem to work across the board to improve strength, improve hypertrophy, and improve nerve to muscle communication and performance. The first thing that's absolutely key for nerve to muscle communication and physical performance of any kind might not sound that exciting to you, but it is very exciting, and that's salt. Nerve cells, neurons, communicate with each other and communicate with muscle by electricity. But that electricity is generated by particular ions moving into and out of the neuron. And the rushing in of a particular ion, sodium, salt, is what allows nerve cells to fire. If you don't have enough salt in your system, your neurons and your brain and your nerve to muscle communication will be terrible. If you have sufficient salt, it will be excellent. How much salt will depend on how much water you're drinking, how much caffeine you're drinking, and how much food you're ingesting. So, and whether or not you're taking any diuretics, how hot it is, etc., how much you're sweating. So you want to make sure that you have enough salt, potassium, and magnesium in your system if you want to perform well. I realize that salt isn't a very glamorous performance tool, but it is vital. It is absolutely vital. And the endurance athletes and the people that train in high heat can speak to the fact that when your electrolytes are low, your brain doesn't function, your body doesn't function nearly as well. In fact, even for mental work, for studying and for writing and for doing math and coding, doing analytic work of any kind, even a hard conversation that's important to you, having sufficient electrolytes is really going to help, and being low on electrolytes won't help. And just drinking water won't help because you need electrolytes. The other thing that's been shown over and over again in numerous well-controlled studies to improve muscle performance is creatine. Early on, there was a lot of controversy about creatine, but There are many studies. If you want, you can go to this website that everyone now knows I love, which is this free website, examine.com. 18 studies supporting that muscle creatine content can be increased by ingesting creatine. How much creatine? Well, I asked the experts, and they tell me that for somebody who's about 180 pounds, 5 grams a day should be sufficient or so. Heavier than 180, so if you're a 220 pound or 230 pound person, 10 to 15 grams of creatine. People lighter than 180 pounds, maybe 3 to 5 grams of creatine, or even 1 to 3 grams. Creatine is a fuel source for early in bouts of activity, for high intensity activity. It is also a fuel source for neurons in the brain, and it can have some cognitive enhancing effects. So creatine is a very interesting molecule. Early on, when it was released as a supplement, it was thought that you had to load it in higher dosages for a few days and then maintain it at lower dosages. So you take 20 or 30 grams a day, then back off to 5 or 10. It doesn't seem to be the case. You can get all the benefits from taking the dosages at the low level I just mentioned a few moments ago as they relate to body weight throughout. So salt and electrolytes, absolutely key. The way that it brings more water into cells of various kinds. As an indirect effect, it can help increase lean mass because of the way that it brings more water into muscle, and probably also because of the way that if you get stronger, you can generate more force and generate more hypertrophy. It reduces fatigue. 7 studies have shown that it reduces fatigue. There are a few other effects that are interesting and notable, but the big ones are the ones that I referred to before about increased power output, etc. And I just want to emphasize that creatine can increase this hormone that we talked about in the testosterone episode, dihydrotestosterone, which is testosterone converted by 5-alpha reductase into dihydrotestosterone. It's the more dominant androgen in humans, leads to increases in strength and libido and so forth. So creatine, definitely a powerful performance-enhancing molecule. The other one that personally I've never tried, but that seems to have very strong and well-supported effects, is Beta-Alanine. Now, Beta-Alanine is interesting because when you hear about weight training, you think about heavy deadlifts and bench presses, all that kind of stuff that people are doing. But Beta-Alanine seems to support exercise that is of slightly longer duration. So a mix of anaerobic and aerobic type movements. So these are physical performance in the 60 to 240 second range. So you can use your mind and kind of figure out, like things that weights of the that limit you to 8 to 15 repetitions. Cardiovascular exercise of the sort like rowing or sprinting. So interval work. It seems to help with that kind of work. So we're not talking about long runs. We're not talking about heavy deadlifts. The standard dose is somewhere between 2 and 5 grams. Again, as always, check with a doctor, make sure these things are safe for you. But it really seems to improve muscular endurance, improve anaerobic running capacity, reduce fatigue. There are even some interesting effects on reduction of body fat and improvements in lean mass. So creatine, beta-alanine, electrolytes, these are kind of the core 3 things that seem to improve performance and are well supported by the scientific literature. It comes to supporting muscle, to supporting the synthesis of larger, what I call myosin balloons. It does seem that ingesting 700 to 3,000 milligrams of the essential amino acid leucine with each meal is important. Now, that does not necessarily mean from supplements. In fact, most people recommend that you get your protein, you get your amino acids, including your essential amino acids and your leucine from whole foods. High quality proteins are high density proteins. What do you mean by that? Well, it is true that a lot of sources of protein are found in things like beans and nuts and things like that all the essential amino acids can be found there. But per unit calorie, if it's in your practice, and it's in your ethics to ingest animal proteins, it's true that, for instance, 200 calories of steak or chicken or fish or eggs will have a higher density of essential amino acids than the equivalent amount of calories from nuts or plants. That's just simply the way it works. So I'm not, for the vegans and vegetarians, I'm certainly not saying there's no way that you can support muscle growth. You absolutely can. Some of them might want to supplement leucine, but this 700 to 3,000 milligrams of leucine per meal is one of the best ways that's been shown to support the synthesis of more myosin if your goal is hypertrophy And it's also the way that you would support muscle repair if your goal is strength. So that's specifically geared towards muscle hypertrophy and strength. And I encourage you to think about this protein density issue and whether or not you ingest animal proteins or you don't, to think about whether or not you're getting sufficient essential amino acids, especially leucine.